So on this session, we'll start as we usually do in a moment, which is to do a little bit of chanting and a guided meditation, a bit of sitting, and I'd like to do some reflections that aren't necessarily going to be very well thought out, but more impressions as was written and sent out by Michael yesterday, I think, from the Planet Local Summit, and relating some of the impression points of that on me. I mean, there are many, many different impression points that have been very profound, evocative, but just to try and pull out a few that may be pertinent for you, and try and connect it a little bit to the Dharma, which of course is our primary ground and focus. So let's just take a few minutes to arrive, mostly with ourselves, and as we do in the way of the Dharma. So that usually means slowing down. We've been involved in some momentum activity, things to do, to the point where we can just feel our body. And maybe just feeling the point of contact of our body with the chair or feet on the floor or cushion. And just taking time to receive that point of contact with earth, the earth element. This is our ground. This is the most really obvious and important point of contact as earth beings, grounded by the force of gravity. Something so obvious like fish swimming in water that we don't notice, or at least the mind in its more air element, cognitive, spatial, imaginal realms, forgets that actually it's connected with the body and is embodied. So just whatever way the body is feeling, just being grateful. I feel grateful myself. I don't actually feel that great at the moment. Rushing around. I've been rushing around a lot, especially in this conference mode. Back went out a bit with everything, but I still feel grateful. Don't have to feel perfect. Just to have a breath, just to feel the breath, just to feel the body, just to feel the ground, just to feel our contact with each other through this medium, wherever we're calling from, whatever time of day or evening. So once we found our body, then what I like to do, and what I often start a session with, is just taking, say, 5 slower, deeper breaths, and feeling each of those breaths suffusing through the body, down through the somatic, felt sense areas of the body. And then on the exhalation, you might just find areas where you're holding, like softening around the shoulders, softening around the belly. So let's just take, you can count them on your fingers if you like. Let's just take 5 slower, deepening breaths, which I find not only helps to slow down and ground, but also recalibrates a little the nervous system from the momentum of it all. And just as we do that, and we start to, as the Buddha so profoundly grounded us in the core of the practice through embodiment, as we start to be more embodied presence here with however it is, we just notice the feeling tones that we're with, that are part of our embodied experience, this portal of receptivity through felt sense, through the somatic experience. And this is an area that we can also regulate through using breath and awareness and attention. Point of choice that we have is where we bring attention, the point of agency. So if you do feel any feeling tones that feel discordant or upset in some way, anxious, then just to gently receive, kindly receive those feeling tones. There's nothing wrong or wrong with you because we don't feel good sometimes. It's natural. We neither have to judge or dismiss or get lost or overly get shaped by what is felt, but we're just with that. And again, we can take attention, gentle, kindly, receptive attention to point of sensation within the feeling tone. And can take the breath there as well. The breath is a way of soothing, as the Buddha teaches in the first foundation. Breathing to being with breath in body, experiencing the whole body, which includes the felt sense, the somatic, and in that process, calming, soothing, grounding. So let's just work a little bit at that point of practice, if that's helpful, with any discordant feeling tones. And you can also just subtly on the exhalation, this feeling of release or letting be, or in the 16th step of the Anapana mindfulness of breath sutta, this beautiful word, Thanissara, which means to give back, to release, to give back to Dharma, to nature, whatever we're holding that doesn't really belong to us, passing through. As the Buddha said, these feelings, sometimes they're like winds, just come, don't know where from, why they're landing. Sometimes you do, and you can track it. With the meditative work, we can just allow what's being held that doesn't really need to be held onto, to be released, to be offered back. Something really difficult, it's like putting on the shrine, putting on the altar, to offer up and letting it just sit there and process in the mystery of presence itself until things start to illuminate and shift and work themselves through. Any points of pain in the body, physical pain, we can say pain. And also we can go beneath description to the actual sensation, either a little bit around the edges if it's difficult to be with, or more fully into the core. And just allowing awareness to touch there too with the breath. Not to dig in if it's not uncomfortable, but just this gentle touching, knowing, releasing. And just settling in the heart, which often can feel quite turbulent these days. And just in that contemplation, to bring the contemplation of trusting your own deeper being, trusting what life and where life has brought you to this moment. All things considered, this is the optimum way for you to be right now. And even if it doesn't feel like that, to trust the process of your own agency, your deeper knowing to bring what is needed, and for you to recognize how to move in accord with right action, right alignment. But underneath the doing and the shaping of who we are and how we land, just trusting the heart itself, your deeper awareness, presence, timeless being, as a point of refuge, as a point of relaxation and ease, of abiding beneath the stress and anxiety of it all. And you might feel that within the heart center area of the body. You might feel it through the body. You might feel it as a deeper sense of inner listening, knowing, presence. That's immanent, illuminating, receptive, simple nature of being itself. There's enough. It's not going anywhere. Nothing needs to be added. So present for the body, present for what's felt, steadying the mind on the rhythms of the body and breath. Allowing the awareness of mind to illuminate all that is, while resting in the heart, in the core, in awareness itself. Quality of presence, innate presence. Being aware of the field beyond the your own body, your own environment that you're in, that we're in a larger interbeing field with all of life, actually, within a large, ultimately profoundly mysterious cosmos of interbeing. Everything is resident in this one heart, this one awareness. No time and space dissolves. The sense of self and other dissolves in this one shared field of, sometimes called interbeing, sometimes called entanglement. It's both personal and impersonal, intimate and collective, timeless and time-bound, mortal and deathless. So as the Buddha taught that we can engage this field, mind, like a conch shell sounding a note, can resonate with the Brahma-vihara, the divine qualities of the natural state of heart-mind, love, or non-division, non-hatred, non-aversion, inclusivity, friendliness, with feeling the pain and holding empathy, compassion, a deep place where we share this common experience with all beings, with dukkha, satisfactoriness, challenge, that we can meet with increasing our capacity for compassion for ourselves and others. Of upholding that which is beautiful, good, joyful, successes, wholesome successes, of all, knowing that is our success too. Seeking to uplift the good and resonate with that. Beautiful. The potential of that power within the shadows that we surf in these times, the potential of the radiancy of the goodness, innate goodness, millions of beings in any moment. And the deep peace of letting be, of equanimity, of seeing all with a more equal mind, the timeless, the deathless, the peaceful. Allowing the field around us, within us, without limitation, to be suffused with these Brahma Viharas. And in a moment, we'll do a chant to take that intention of mind into the frequency of sound, which has a power to also uplift and infuse all with these beautiful divine abodes. So the mantra that I'm going to do, don't have to worry about the chanting books because many of you probably all know it. It's very simple. If you have got the chanting, I can actually put it there for you. There we go. It's on the third page, the first mantra. This little booklet is just coming away in the chat. So it's Tayata, which is this Tayata, Tathagata. This is the way the Buddha most spoke about himself, the one Tata, dwelling in suchness, non-moving, non-going anywhere, timeless being, Gata, coming and going within the suchness. Tayata, this is really the heart, true heart, Tayata. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha, paying homage to this great awakened heart, inwardly, outwardly, historically, indwelling within all. Okay. Paying homage to the indwelling, awakened nature in your own being, in each of our beings, and in all beings. Paying homage to the historical Buddha and all carrying the teachings over time and space for us to reflect on here and now. Thank you, everyone, and again, welcome to this session. As I mentioned, and as you probably have got wind of from the messaging, is I'm in the UK. I've been in Ireland the last 3 weeks, primarily for a family visit, but also just being on the far west coast in particular, with the magical elemental beings there. And also have just returned to UK, also a family visit. It was had the chance to touch into this summit that's happening in Bristol. And so I just wanted to offer just a little collage of impressions from what has been a very full 3 days, extraordinary full days, far exceeding my expectations. Sometimes these conferences, you feel like, oh, okay, well, but they're really well thought out, really profound speakers, really reaching deeply into this time, this moment that we're in, and the extraordinary power, profound challenge, and yet potential of it, and realness of, talking very real, in very real terms of what we face, the catastrophe, really, that we're in. And all that's led us to this point. And so it's really way beyond what I can't really summarize everything. I've taken about 50 pages of typed notes listening, and there could have been much more, but my fingers were a bit wearing down. So I'm just going to pick a few points. And there were 127 presenters, some of them at fast speed in collage presentations, but from all over the world, all continents, representing almost every possible representation of humanity at this time. So there was a lot of diversity of representation, not just in ethnic terms, but also in different fields people are working in, and different modalities, and different parts of society. So that also brought a lot of interest of not only working from the bottom up, which is often the way that activists engage the whole field of environmental, ecological, deep systems shift. It's this feeling, this historical feeling of we're against this machinery and we have to have a revolution of some kind to shift the system from the bottom up. And that is definitely the case, but there was also those representing those in the middle and those actually top down that are often seen as the perpetuators of this, the devastation, the sort of death culture, if you like, that has in a way begun to have its own momentum, and that are representing corporations that are part of that momentum, but are also human beings within it. So that's, I think, a very also unusual way of framing this sense of, okay, we're in this moment together and people are playing different roles, but primarily we're foremost humans together. And not only humans, but we're all beings together. And I think this is another important part of the holistic view, because we have had an historic sense of us as humans as the dominant species, and there's a lot of historical ways that that's come about. And with that, of course, the right to have actually shaped not only the billions of species that we share this planet with, but the planet itself. We're actually literally reshaping geologically and in so many other ways the planet that we're living on in not good ways. It leads us to this point of mass extinction. So these are very weighty things to really consider. So I do have made a few notes. I don't know if I can stick to them just as points of reference to try and I just wanted to pull on a few that were pertinent. I mean, it was all pertinent. I haven't really touched into some of the more subtle and nuanced philosophical presentations from really deep thinkers, but more things that perhaps can lead us into a practical understanding and practical application, which I always appreciate about the Buddha. He's pretty practical, not just philosophical and metaphysical. But also, firstly, just to begin with where I am in Bristol, because Bristol is actually quite a certain icon, has a certain iconic place in this story, having been historically one of the main slaving ports, not only of the Midway Passage from Africa, but also right back even to the 1100s or so, where slave trade was also actually happening from there, of more local European, from England, Ireland, and so forth. So there's this long history of commerce connected with enslavement, but it was for sure one of the prominent ports during the 17th, 18th centuries, where city merchants positioned themselves for economic gain. And it's thought to have estimated that over 500,000 peoples from the African continent that were enslaved were traded by Bristol merchants. So it has this rather very difficult, profoundly challenging history. And as things are in this time where the history is becoming revealed, the apocalypse of the revelation of what's been in the shadows is being more and more unveiled, so we can see what our civilization's actually been built on. There was, when the Black Lives Matters demonstrations happened in June of 2020, that became a global event, as you know. And one of the leading slavers of Bristol merchant, someone called Edward Colston, had a huge statue in the port of Bristol, which was toppled over and thrown by people into the sea. So this was a very recent event, and in many ways what I'm experiencing in Bristol, is a long time since I've been. I used to come here when I was younger, actually, because it was quite an alternative place, is that it is a very alternative place. There's a lot of, I was just listening to the mayor speak this morning, former mayor, and talking about one of the reasons he became mayor was because he was interested in disrupting the system. He wanted to bring back, he wanted to make it a city for people, not for corporations. So one of the things that he did is started to reclaim, which I've actually experienced now, like streets, take the streets away from the traffic. And so in the evenings and over weekends, the whole streets turn into fairs. People share food, local people bring in food, people are selling their things on the streets, and the whole thing changes, the whole vibe changes. And many other things that he's done like that, like reclaiming buildings and turning them into public local spaces. He's all about local economy. So there are many examples of people like that during this summit, of actually translating the philosophy into actual direct action and using political positions to do it. I'm also here at the time of the results of feeling a deepening despair from the Brexit. I haven't really got time to go into that, but I think one thing is important for me to mention, because it was important for me to see, because I've been very despairing, because in some ways Brexit was a sort of Trumpian success, if you like, here in Britain, where it was a sort of Trojan horse, really, for built on a very deceitful and media campaign, politically driven media campaign, that was focused in dividing people against each other and their best interests, so as these things happen. But it really has been a Trojan horse for a massive transfer of wealth to a tiny percent, and has really, in that process, driven people into a loss, for, there's like nearly 5,000 food banks, hang on, not that many, maybe 3,000 food banks across the UK. This is like the fifth or sixth leading economy in the world. That's never happened before. So people have been forced into a more feudalistic social system, really. And there's also been a criminalization of people's natural rights to protest, particularly climate protesters, thrown in jail, not allowed to defend themselves properly, and so on and so on. And a sort of really a hijacking of regulations and mass deregulation, rivers filled with untreated sewers, coastlines, it just goes on and on. It's been really, really despairing, the naked level really of corporate capture, to the point of the recent, a few days ago, the current Prime Minister approving this massive oil field extraction, in the North Sea, the Rosebank oil field, so called, which is actually has no benefit at all for the regular people of Britain, and so on and so on. So it's like a captured government, and so it's not really a government. It's a country run by a corporation, and this really, it's like a petri dish really for where we are going if we don't stop this movement. So I felt very despairing about this. I've been watching from the sidelines over in the US, watching this all happen, and it's sort of been a little bit under the radar in terms of the impacts. People can't quite believe how fascistic it's become over here. But what I've been really seeing is, and from some of the talks, is that actually there's an archetypal place for the monster, if you like, the monster that comes into our lives, that has the role of really has to energize us into radical change. And in some way, what I started to feel, that this has been like a monster that's happened, a monster destruction, and it's not unrelated with a sort of destructive force on the planet, but it's also really energizing people. I think people have felt very overwhelmed, very disempowered, disenfranchised from these forces, these big nameless forces that are taking over their lives. But I've also seen a counter movement happening, like an counterintelligence. I'm seeing it in the summit, I'm seeing it on the streets, people sharing their local products. I'm seeing it in this spirit rising that as part of the alternative scene here for many years, a long time ago, but seeing another generation coming in, younger people engaged, and an incredibly, very sophisticated, deep understanding of what's happening, and not only a commitment to the potential of the moment, but actually engaging and creating a new story, a new world under this dying dinosaur that's kind of suffocating us all. So there was something in me that felt, well, actually, it's what the monster is waking people up. We have to be woken up because we're under a spell, and it seems to be taking that. It seems to be taking this unbelievable threat right in our faces, for us to stop being asleep. And in Britain, it's happened very quickly. So although it's been terrible, there's this counter energy, and that's the first time I felt something of an understanding of maybe a deeper principle in life, is that actually, the way things move to one end, to one trajectory, it's got to necessarily activate and energize a whole counter force. And in many ways, perhaps something like Extinction Rebellion, which grew out of the UK, was a spearhead, but I'm seeing something moving from from another deeper level, perhaps, of society. Of course, it's still a huge task ahead. But one of the things to just move on from the Britain story, because it's really a global story, is that, just as a short example of that counterforce, is that we've seen globally and here in the UK, is that the government signing off on a huge oil capture project. There is the ecocide law going and lawyers going for the planet going, hang on a minute, not so quick. So there's a lot of people like saying, well, we're going to take you to court. The climate lawyer Tessa Khan, executive director of a campaign here called Uplift, is talking about the grounds to take the government to court. So, you know, it's not so quick that they're just can run over. There's, you know, stops and balances that can start to engage. One of the things I think is really pertinent to look at is this reclamation, and I think this goes very well with Sacred Mountain Sangha, reclaiming the sacred. I mean, it's one of our central themes. What does that mean? And I felt it was really fleshed out in just the title of this summit, which was Planet Local. And it's the idea of reclamation from globalization to local, and it doesn't mean to say not being global. We are global. That's a movement that's happened. We are global people. We're doing something global right now. Everyone is on a different part of the planet or different time zone, whatever. This is a global meeting, but it's not globalization. And I just want to sort of define that a little bit as I understood it from the conference, because this was such a big theme, is that globalization has one primary agenda, which is the drive for profit, and increasingly for few. That the beneficiaries of that profit is increasingly, you know, the 1% and so on. And so in that kind of focus and in that trajectory, in that globalization drive for profit, everything becomes a means to that end. So nature, as we see, is a means to that end. Extraction, the philosophy of extraction, that's been going on for a long time, hundreds of years. But also humans become a resource in that wheel, in that cog. So we can start, if we don't understand that that's happening, we start to define ourselves and the successes of our life according to an external system that actually is divorced from the humane and is disempowering the deeper levels of our being. Doesn't even see, you know, it's a soulless system. It doesn't even acknowledge. We are just become a function for that outcome. So global lands us into the sense of disempowerment, being split, being lonely, power being centralized. You know, choice becomes very hard. Real choice. You know, we get these choices. Do you want like this cereal or that cereal? But real choice feels less and less possible. Whereas local has more the sense of being empowered locally, where capital is kept locally to local food growers, small farms, sees nature and humans as a source of life, as part of life, not as a cog to be extracted from. So whereas globalization is more like a uniformity of everything. Cultures become uniform, shopping malls become uniform, everything, you know, thinking becomes uniform, even our imaginations become uniform. Then this sort of more local is more about decentralizing that uniformity, and it is about the reality of life being diverse, and not just saying diversity in the way that it's often used ethnically or racially, but vast diversity. Like evolutionary processes are extremely diverse in and of themselves and express diversity. And so diversity of cultures, of clothes, of foods, of viewpoints, of politics, and so on. Rooted in a sense of the empowered dignity of each person, that everyone has worth rather than this hierarchy of worth. So there's a lot in this, you know, in terms of how do we, as a Dharma practitioner, how do this system that we're in and its value system you know, how does that value system shape our own sense of self? You know, are we making it? Are we not? According to what agenda? And how do we see ourselves and each other according to the patterning and the very powerful messaging that we get through a system predicated upon economy and profit, and growth is the ultimate goal, you know, which in itself, of course, we know from the Dharma, we know from everything we're seeing, is a culture, has turned us into a culture of death and destruction, not a culture of life. So I think all of this is really what I'm really, where am I going now? I think one of the things where the summit was going is this was initiated by someone that you might be aware of, who's from Sweden, Helena Norberg Hodge, who's a Dharma practitioner. Helena was someone that was known to many of us back in the early days of the Dharma arriving on Western shores, who worked a lot in Ladakh and lived there a long time and realized that this was a culture of happiness, not a culture of profit. And so this is a development. Helena has been one of the leading forces behind the summit, and behind her a movement called local futures, of localization, but localization within the global. So I think, you know, these are sorts of areas that we can look at and really unpick. How are we shaped within the system, and what emotional, psychological affects does that bring about? And how do we see through those lenses of conditioning, and how can we actually reorientate into something that is more authentic, that is actually remembering our belonging in a different way, that we're belonging, you know, as was said, that we all ultimately came from indigenous belonging, indigenous to the earth. You know, there are those that still hold that wisdom, of course, and that is a very particular kind of place that we bring respect and honoring to, but it's not to deflect from the fact that we have deeper roots than belonging to a modern system, deeper roots as humans, deeper roots into land, deeper roots into community, into belonging in particular ways. And what is it to reclaim that? What is it to reclaim the sacredness of being ensouled beings within a web of life, rather than a cog in a machine that has a set of, you know, success values that aren't really necessarily true success. You know, so these are some of the things that the Dharma can really help with, because the Dharma is an act of reclamation of heart, reclamation of body. Every time we sit to, you know, we stop to pause, to sit, to bring mindfulness, we're reclaiming ourselves, reclaiming our authentic being. We're aligning with the truer impulse of the Dharma in our heart, what is important, what is meaningful, what is authentic. But, you know, mindfulness can also be hijacked and subsumed into making us better, more functional cogs in the system. So what are we doing in the Dharma around that, you know? Are we just sort of using it so that we are, you know, so that we can function better in a dysfunctional system and manage our stress? Or are we doing what the Buddha did, to really deeply inquire and dismantle a system if needs be, and create and change the system as he did? So, you know, these are really important questions for us. I can't go into it right now, but can name the territories. So the other, you know, there's a little time left, but the other couple of points. There's John Perkins, I think is the man's name. Let me just see. You might have heard of him. He's a former, hang on a sec. Let me just see where we get down to him. There's a lot I'm going to have to break past here. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's the person that goes around and used to go around and extract resources, whole countries, whole political systems, whole governments in the service of corporations, and then completely betray them and do them in and so on. It's that story that we're still in. And has completely changed his life, was a co-founder of Pachamama Alliance and so on. And his point was speaking about perception. He said it's really ultimately a matter of perception, because the idea of success, according to the system we're in that's killing the earth and all of us on it, that's generating a death culture of extinction, is actually predicated upon the perception of what success is and what we should, the perception of eternal growth. These are erroneous perceptions. So if you can change the perception to more towards reality, which is of course again the endeavor of the Dharma, not towards some ideology but towards reality, and then if you can change the goal of a human-based, self-sustaining, circular, self-nourishing system that is inclusive of all types of diversity and needing all types of diversity, then you start to change the game. And one of the points that came through in the conference, and I only got a few more minutes, so I'm going to have to jump to this, is that peoples don't change perception on data. You can do the much science data. I mean, some of us do. Some of us go, oh my God, we've passed so many different boundaries. So 6 or 7 of the 9 boundaries we shouldn't, thresholds of destruction. We've already passed so many of them. We're at 1.5 going to 2 degrees Celsius and so on, above heating above the post-industrial, pre-industrial age and so on, which is a disaster. So some of us are, but most of humanity is not. But what is humanity is moved upon stories. So how do we find the stories in our conversations? How do we, and this was really an important point, we all have to be part of the choir. we all have to find our singing voice. We all have to find what stories, who are you talking to? Like I was in Ireland, I was just walking along the road and bumped into, it was a place we were staying, a local farmer, older man. And as in Ireland, you kind of stop and chat. You don't just go, you don't head down and keep going. You're going to have to be prepared to chat, especially in the rural area. How are you doing? What's going on? And where you're from and all that. And he was like, he just was talking about how he stopped spraying the hedges and noticing all this life coming back and so on. And then I was going, oh, that's amazing. That sounds great. And we started talking about stuff like that. And then he just kind of turned the conversation on its head and said, everything that's going on, I don't think we're going to make it. What do you think? Now, this is a guy, rural farmer in west of Ireland. And I'm going, yeah, I think it's difficult. So we had this conversation. Everyone knows. And his way in, he was looking exactly at what was happening in his world when he stopped spraying. And that was something he could do. And he said, I'm just going to keep doing this. We could all do it. And I said, yeah, if we all do something, it will really help shift the, so it was a dark conversation, difficult conversation, but we landed up in what the potential was in in his life, what he could do. And me going, great, that's great. So this kind of like giving the space for these conversations, finding the stories, finding the images that we had. There was one person that who is an actress from Australia, and she talked about and had been in the fashion industry and all the rest of it, and realizing that really isn't her world, and had a huge turnaround. And what turned her around were the devastating fires in Australia, if you remember, a few years ago. Devastating. I mean, we've seen them everywhere now. In Canada, we have them in California, they've had them in Paradise, the town of Paradise, and so on. But in 2019, those Australian fires, she's sitting on the edge of a cliff, a young, beautiful woman, she says she felt like jumping from the cliff because the smoke was so black, so thick, she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. And she felt, what is the use of me being here and having to live through what's coming? So she felt this utter despair at that moment. And she was talking about how she could smell the billion animals that had burned. And she was talking about how people, her friends were talking about how they could hear the koalas screaming. Now that is a different human story than, so many acres burned, so many. These are the levels we have to bring to break the spell. We have to break the spell of normalizing a death march. We have to break the spell with ordinary people beyond our silos. But as she was sitting there, one of the things she said that changed her mind is that she's actually a Dharma practitioner. She said, well, I'll probably just have to come back and redo it all, so I might as well just stay. But she actually what she did do is there was a death of the way she had been in her life, and she started to completely reorientate her life. And actually she came from a Quechua family from Peru, although fully westernized in Australia. And so what she did is a big journey of reclamation of roots, which is all of our journey, a reclamation. We're not just these cut off beings that don't belong to anything, which is what the globalization is. We're siloed as individuals. We don't really belong to each other, belong to the planet, belong to nature. Nature doesn't belong to, so this reclamation process. So just, I've come up at time. There's so much more I could say, but what I felt about this, being in this summit, it was very clarifying for me, because as you know, I've been thinking about and writing about this stuff for donkey's years, really, but I really felt there were a lot of pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that got placed well for me in energizing my thinking. And I'm really excited to write more and teach more around this and really explore more together. And we are at Sacred Mountain Sangha. We want to have these conversations together and to have this input from, just really leading edge folks from around the planet, to know we're not alone, and that in spite of, sometimes I think America is a sometimes say the belly of the beast, it's a hard one. It's a hard one. It's big. It's, sometimes it feels like a sort of a petro state with a bit of frill around it, It's just like, so it's a hard task, but it's not an impossible task. It was like the Buddha, this is a hard task, but it's doable. Teaching the Dharma, this is a hard thing, I don't want to do it, but it's doable. And we can do this. So I came away, in spite of the realism of the enormity of what we face. It is enormous. It's multiple levels. It's deep. It's profound. It's everything is up now for us to engage. I do feel this, whatever happens, this tremendous sense of, I feel like very energized about the potential that we have, and to see that people have power actually when they orientate to what is meant by local, not just local, but local in terms of reclaiming our local belonging within a global world. So more about it later in some form or another. We're going to pause here because, as we usually do in these Sunday events, there is a recording of this conference. And what I would like to do is maybe there's so much of it. So this is one of the questions that's come in. I just want to put a pause and a few announcements in a second, but there's so much of it actually, and so much that we've gathered from the Dharma Council that we're still, Sumeda's gone through and helped transcribe everything. There's a lot that we have to distill now into deepening our understanding and our process and our conversation to orientate ourselves forward. So I think what would be nice is to have some of these recordings together that we can listen to and have focused conversations. So we'll be looking at that. But let me just pause here for a second, because there's a few things to mention. For you to look out with Sacred Mountain Sangha is really thrilled that this month we've got another round of Learn the Great Compassion Mantra with my dearest friend Melzeki, former nun, together. Wonderful being, that we'll be starting that on Monday the 9th. There's 8 classes. I'm doing a session on refuge, resilience, presence, and love in our times. That's a Spirit Rock retreat. There are places open still on the Spirit Rock retreat. There's Insight Retreat November. That's the holiday season. Sorry, the thing I'm doing is mindful optimizations on healing ourselves and the world. It's continuing these conversations. On that one, I really want to look at, that's October 20th. All of this you'll see on the Sacred Mountain Sangha site. I really want to look at what holds us back, ancestral conditioning, patterning, freeing ourselves from internal oppression. A lot of this is happening at high speed, but sorry about that, but we'll touch into that on that one. And a very exciting coming up, we have the Foundations of Buddhist Mindfulness, a 4-week class for all levels, but particularly those that would really like to deepen and, or just orientate within this very primal practice, core practice, run by Gulu, one of our core teachers. And save the date, please, for December the 9th here in Sebastopol. We'll be doing, I'm not here in Sebastopol, I'm in Bristol, but when I'm back in Sebastopol, we'll be doing an end of year fundraiser December 9th. That's going to be a very cool event. And the other thing I'd like to bring to your attention here is, if you would like to support Sacred Mountain Sangha, offering Dharma, that is always very much appreciated. And there's the link. Okay, so let's just pause for a moment. That was a lot. Need to take a breath. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's just share all the blessings of our practice, of our contemplation, and sending a prayer for the welfare of all, wherever any being is placed in this dynamic that we're in right now. May all be protected and free from harm. May all be touched by the process of awakening. May all old ancient wounds be healed. And may we share blessings with all beings, and particularly the spirit of Mother Earth. Gratitude, deep respect. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Thank you so much, everyone.